The grand ballroom of Julian Chen's cliffside mansion sparkled under crystal chandeliers. Outside, the sunset painted the Pacific Ocean in shades of gold and pink. But inside, the wealthy guests barely noticed. They were too busy seeing and being seen at what everyone called the charity event of the year. Julian stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, swirling an expensive whiskey in a crystal glass. At 36, he had the confident stance of a man who owned not just the room, but half the tech companies in Silicon Valley. His custom-made suit probably cost more than what most people earned in 3 months. Bored already? A woman's voice pulled Julian from his thoughts. He turned to see Vanessa Lynn, his girlfriend of 8 months. She wore a red dress that matched her lipstick. Her dark hair swept up to show off diamond earrings. His latest gift to her. These things are always the same. Julian sighed. Rich people pretending to care about causes while networking for their next deal. Including you? Vanessa raised an eyebrow, but her smile took the sting out of her words. Julian laughed. At least I'm honest about it. This gala will raise millions for music education programs, and everyone gets tax write-offs and good publicity. Win-win. Around them, waiters in black and white uniforms moved silently between groups, offering champagne and tiny appetizers on silver trays. In one corner, a string quartet played classical music that nobody really listened to. The entertainment is starting soon, Vanessa said. You promised the donors some impressive performances tonight. Julian checked his watch, a rare timepiece worth more than some of the cars parked outside. Yes, the usual lineup. Opera singers, classical musicians, that jazz band everyone's talking about. All very safe choices approved by the board. You sound disappointed, Vanessa noted. I'm tired of predictable, Julian admitted. Everyone here is so polished, so carefully constructed. Nobody takes risks anymore, Vanessa laughed. What did you expect? People juggling chainsaws at your charity gala? At least that would be interesting, Julian muttered. As they made their way through the crowd, people parted for them. Everyone wanted Julian's attention. Tech entrepreneurs pitching their startups, celebrities wanting to be associated with his success, charity directors hoping for donations. Julian greeted them all with practiced charm, but Vanessa could tell his mind was elsewhere. They reached the stage area where rows of chairs had been arranged for the upcoming performances. Julian's friend Thomas Wong waved them over. He sat with his wife Diane and several other couples, all regulars in Julian's social circle. There he is, the man of the hour, Thomas called out. Come sit with us before someone else tries to pitch you their revolutionary app idea. Julian grinned, grateful for the escape. He and Thomas had been friends since college, before either of them had made their first million. Now they both ran billion-dollar companies, but Thomas was the only one who still called Julian on his nonsense. This place looks amazing, Diane said as Julian and Vanessa sat down. The decorations must have cost a fortune. Money well spent if it impresses donors, Julian replied with a shrug. Besides, what's the point of having billions if you can't throw a decent party? The group laughed, the easy laughter of people who never had to worry about money. As they chatted, Julian noticed a man quietly moving around the edges of the room. He wore the same uniform as the waitstaff but carried cleaning supplies instead of trays. The janitor kept his head down as he carefully wiped a small spill near the bar, trying to remain invisible to the wealthy guests. There was something about the man's careful movements that caught Julian's attention. Unlike everyone else in the room who seemed eager to be noticed, this man clearly wanted to disappear into the background. The lights dimmed slightly, signaling the start of the performances. The event coordinator Priya Sharma took the stage and tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for your generous support of the Chen Foundation for Musical Arts. Tonight, we have some extraordinary talents to entertain you. Julian tuned out as Priya listed the performers. He'd approved the lineup weeks ago, all established musicians with impressive resumes. The first performer was an opera singer whose high notes made the older donors nod in appreciation. Isn't she wonderful? Vanessa whispered. She's technically perfect, Julian admitted. But there's no surprise, no risk. After the opera singer came a string trio, then a pianist from a famous conservatory. All flawless, all predictable. During a break between performances, Julian's restlessness grew. What's the point of all this? He asked, not really expecting an answer. The point is raising money for a good cause, Vanessa reminded him. No, I mean the performances. We're celebrating musical education. But we only showcase people who took the safest path to success. Thomas leaned in. Sounds like someone needs another drink. Or maybe you're just getting philosophical in your old age. I'm serious, Julian insisted. I bet there's more raw talent out there than on that stage. People who never got the chances these performers had. Vanessa gave him a curious look. That's unusually thoughtful of you. Don't sound so surprised, Julian said, pretending to be offended. Well, if you're so convinced, Vanessa challenged playfully, why don't you find some undiscovered talent right here, right now? Their friends laughed, but Julian's eyes lit up with that familiar spark that appeared whenever someone dared him to do something impossible. It was the same look he'd had when he dropped out of business school to start his first company. Maybe I will, he said, scanning the room. His gaze landed on the janitor he'd noticed earlier. The man was now near the grand piano at the side of the stage, carefully dusting its gleaming surface while trying not to disturb anything. Something about the way the janitor's hands moved over the piano caught Julian's attention. There was a familiarity there, a reverence that seemed out of place for someone just cleaning the instrument. A reckless idea formed in Julian's mind. Hey, he called out, loud enough for those nearby to hear. You there, the cleaning guy? The janitor looked up, startled. He appeared to be in his early 30s with warm brown skin and tired eyes. For a split second, something like alarm crossed his face before he quickly lowered his gaze. Yes, sir? His voice was soft, with a slight accent Julian couldn't place. By now, the people around Julian were watching the exchange with curious expressions. Julian felt a rush of excitement at the unexpected turn the evening was taking. What's your name? Julian asked. The man hesitated. Miguel, sir. Miguel, Julian repeated, standing up. That piano you're cleaning, can you play it? The question hung in the air. Miguel froze, his cleaning cloth still on the piano's surface. Around them, conversations quieted as people turned to watch. I should get back to work, Miguel said carefully. But Julian was already walking toward him, champagne glass in hand. Come on, just answer the question. Can you play? Vanessa followed Julian, tugging at his arm. Julian, stop this. You're embarrassing him. I'm not embarrassing anyone, Julian insisted. I'm just asking a simple question. By now they had reached the piano. Up close, Julian could see that Miguel's hands were calloused and rough from hard work, but his fingers were long and graceful. Sir, please, Miguel said quietly. I need this job. Something in his tone made Julian pause. This wasn't just embarrassment, there was real fear there. For a moment, Julian considered backing off, but then he caught Thomas watching with an amused expression, and his pride took over. Play something, Julian said, gesturing to the piano, and I'll double whatever they're paying you tonight. Miguel looked at the piano, then back at Julian. Something flashed in his eyes. Not just worry, but something deeper. Longing, perhaps. I haven't played in a long time, he said softly. Julian felt Vanessa pinch his arm in warning, but he ignored her. The crowd around them had grown curious about the unplanned interruption. Play this piano, Julian announced, his voice carrying across the room. And I'll marry you. Gasps and nervous laughter rippled through the audience. Vanessa stepped away from him, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. Julian, that's enough, she hissed. But Julian was on a roll now, playing to the crowd. What do you say, Miguel? One song and you could become the next Mr. Chen. Think of the benefits, no more cleaning up after rich people. More laughter followed, but it had an uncomfortable edge. Some guests looked away, embarrassed by the display. Others watched with the morbid fascination of people witnessing a car crash in slow motion. Miguel stood perfectly still, his eyes now fixed on the piano keys visible under the open lid. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. Then, without a word, Miguel carefully placed his cleaning supplies on a nearby table. He straightened his uniform jacket, a simple action that somehow carried tremendous dignity. With slow, deliberate movements, he pulled out the piano bench and sat down. Julian felt a twinge of unease. This wasn't going according to plan. The janitor was supposed to be flustered, maybe attempt a simple tune and fail, giving everyone a laugh before the regular performances continued. Instead, Miguel's posture had changed completely. His shoulders relaxed, his back straightened, and his hands hovered over the keys with the confidence of someone coming home after a long journey. Hey, I was just joking around, Julian said, suddenly unsure. You don't have to, but Miguel wasn't listening anymore. His fingers touched the keys, and the first notes filled the silent room. Julian's smile faded as he realized that whatever was about to happen, he had set something in motion that he couldn't control. And for a man who built his empire on always being in control, that was a terrifying thought. The ballroom fell completely silent as Miguel's fingers touched the piano keys. The first notes hung in the air like delicate crystal, pure, clear, and impossibly beautiful. Julian stood frozen, champagne glass still in hand as Miguel began to play Chopin's Ballade No. 1. The piece started gently, almost hesitantly like a quiet conversation, but there was something in those first few measures that made everyone in the room hold their breath. This wasn't the playing of someone who had touched a piano a few times. This was the work of a master. As the music built, flowing from tender to passionate, Julian felt something he hadn't experienced in years, genuine surprise. Miguel's hands moved across the keys with both power and delicacy, his body swaying slightly with the music, his eyes closed as if he'd forgotten where he was. "Oh my God," Vanessa whispered beside Julian. "He's incredible." The wealthy audience, who moments before had been snickering at Julian's joke, now stood transfixed. Some had tears in their eyes. Others leaned forward in their seats, not wanting to miss a single note. The professional musicians scheduled to perform next watched from the wings, their faces showing a mix of shock and admiration. As the piece reached its more complex sections, Miguel's technical skill became even more apparent. His fingers flew across the keys at impossible speeds, yet every note was perfect, every emotion precisely conveyed. The music filled the enormous room, reaching into every corner, touching everyone present. Julian slowly lowered himself back into his chair, his legs suddenly weak. He had meant to create a funny moment at a stuffy party. Instead, he had accidentally uncovered something extraordinary, something real. Thomas leaned over, his earlier amusement gone. "Where did you find this guy?" he whispered. Julian could only shake his head. He hadn't found Miguel. Miguel had been there all along, invisible to everyone who thought they were too important to notice the man cleaning up after them. The music grew more intense. Chopin's composition demanded everything from the performer: technical precision, emotional depth, physical stamina, and Miguel delivered it all. His hands, calloused from years of manual labor, moved with the grace of a dancer and the precision of a surgeon. When the final notes echoed through the ballroom, there was a moment of complete silence. It seemed as if no one dared to breathe, afraid to break the spell that had fallen over the room. Then the applause began. It started slowly, almost cautiously, then built into a thunderous standing ovation. People who normally controlled every emotion were openly weeping. Others were shouting, "Bravo!" at the top of their lungs. Miguel opened his eyes, seeming almost surprised to find himself at a piano in a room full of strangers. He stood and gave a small, humble bow, his face flushed. Then, without a word, he turned to walk back to his cleaning cart. "Wait," Julian called out, pushing through the crowd. "Miguel, wait!" Miguel paused, turning back with uncertainty in his eyes. The crowd parted to let Julian through, everyone watching this unexpected drama unfold. That was... Julian struggled to find the right words. For once in his life, he was completely speechless. "How did you learn to play like that?" Miguel looked down at his hands, then back at Julian. "I studied music a long time ago." His voice was soft but carried a quiet dignity. "In Caracas, Venezuela?" Julian asked, surprised. Miguel nodded. "At the conservatory, before everything changed." Before Julian could ask more questions, Priya rushed over, her event coordinator instincts kicking in. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, taking control of the situation. "What an unexpected treat. Let's give another round of applause for Miguel." The crowd responded enthusiastically, but Julian barely noticed. He was watching Miguel, who looked increasingly uncomfortable with all the attention. This wasn't a man seeking fame or recognition. This was someone who had played from his heart and now wanted to disappear back into the shadows. "We should continue with our scheduled program," Priya said smoothly, gesturing toward the professional musicians waiting in the wings. "No," Julian said firmly. "I want to hear more." He turned to Miguel. "Will you play something else for us?" Miguel hesitated, looking around at the sea of expectant faces. "I should get back to work," he said quietly. "My supervisor." "I'm paying for this entire event," Julian said. "Trust me, your job is safe." He smiled, trying to sound reassuring rather than demanding. "Please, one more piece." Vanessa appeared at Julian's side, her earlier irritation replaced by genuine interest. "We'd all love to hear more," she said gently to Miguel. "But only if you want to play." Something in her tone seemed to reach Miguel. He looked at her, then at the piano, and slowly nodded. "One more," he agreed. As Miguel returned to the piano bench, Julian heard people around him whispering excitedly. He caught fragments of conversations. Where did he learn to play like that? Do you think he has recordings? Has anyone Googled him yet? Miguel positioned his hands over the keys again, took a deep breath, and began to play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. If his Chopin had been impressive, this was transcendent. The piece was famously difficult, written for piano with orchestral accompaniment, yet Miguel somehow made it sound complete even on solo piano. Julian found himself holding his breath again. He had attended countless classical concerts at the best venues in the world, had paid small fortunes for front-row seats to hear renowned pianists, but he had never heard anything like this. It wasn't just technical brilliance. There was soul in Miguel's playing, a depth of emotion that seemed to come from a place of both joy and profound sorrow. "He's not just good," Thomas whispered beside him. "He's world-class." Vanessa nodded, her eyes never leaving Miguel. "Why is he working as a janitor?" She wondered aloud. Julian had no answer. His mind was racing with questions, but also with possibilities. As a businessman, he instinctively recognized untapped potential when he saw it. But this was different. This wasn't just an investment opportunity. This was, he struggled to define it, almost a responsibility. When Miguel finished his second piece, the ovation was even more enthusiastic than the first. People were on their feet, cheering as if they were at a rock concert rather than a charity gala. Miguel acknowledged the applause with another humble bow, then quietly made his way back to his cleaning cart. This time, Julian didn't try to stop him. He watched as Miguel picked up his supplies and slipped out a side door, vanishing as quickly as he had appeared. The scheduled performances continued, but Julian barely paid attention. His mind kept returning to Miguel's playing, to the mystery of how someone with such extraordinary talent had ended up cleaning floors at his party. "You're obsessing," Vanessa noted, nudging him as the third performer took the stage. "Did you hear what I just heard?" Julian asked. "That man should be playing at Carnegie Hall, not emptying trash cans." "Maybe he has his reasons," Vanessa suggested. "Not everyone wants to be famous." Julian couldn't accept that explanation. In his world, talent plus ambition always equaled success. If you had the skills, you used them to climb as high as possible. The idea that someone might choose to remain invisible despite having incredible gifts simply didn't compute. As the evening progressed, Julian found it increasingly difficult to focus on his hosting duties. He smiled mechanically at donors, accepted congratulations on the event's success, but his thoughts kept drifting to Miguel. "I need to find him," he finally told Vanessa as the performances ended and guests began mingling again. "And say what?" she asked. "You already embarrassed him once tonight." Julian winced at the reminder. "I know, I was being an idiot." He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up slightly. "But I need to talk to him. Properly this time." Vanessa studied him for a moment. "You're serious about this?" "I've never been more serious," Julian replied. And he meant it. Something had shifted inside him when Miguel played. Some certainty he had always carried about how the world worked, about who mattered and who didn't, had been shaken, breaking away from the crowd. Julian found Priya and asked for information about the cleaning staff. She directed him to the catering manager, who in turn pointed him toward the service area at the back of the mansion. Julian had never been to this part of his own home before. It was a world away from the opulence of the ballroom. Plain walls, bright fluorescent lighting, concrete floors. Staff members in various uniforms hurried back and forth, cleaning up after the event, breaking down tables, loading dishwashers. He spotted Miguel in a corner, quietly wiping down serving trays. Away from the piano, he once again looked ordinary, just another worker doing his job, invisible to the wealthy people he served. Julian approached slowly, suddenly unsure what to say. His usual confidence had deserted him. For the first time in years, he felt genuinely humbled. "Miguel," he said quietly. Miguel looked up, surprise crossing his face when he saw Julian standing there in his expensive suit. looking decidedly out of place among the staff. "Mr. Chen," Miguel acknowledged with a small nod. "Did you need something?" Julian took a deep breath. "I need to talk to you about your music." Miguel's expression closed off slightly. "There's nothing to talk about, sir. I should finish my work." "Please," Julian said, the word feeling strange on his lips. He rarely said please to anyone these days. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Miguel glanced at his supervisor, who was watching their interaction with obvious curiosity. After a moment, he set down his cleaning cloth and nodded. 5 minutes, he agreed. As they stepped outside into the cool night air, Julian realized he was about to start a conversation that might change both their lives forever. The night air felt cool against Julian's face as he and Miguel stepped onto the terrace. Below them, the lights of the city twinkled like fallen stars. For a moment, neither man spoke. Julian, usually so quick with words, found himself unsure how to begin. Miguel stood with his hands in the pockets of his uniform pants, his posture suggesting he was ready to bolt back inside at any moment. The confidence he had shown at the piano was gone, replaced by the cautious demeanor of someone who had learned to navigate a world that didn't value him. "Your playing was extraordinary," Julian finally said. "I've never heard anything like it." Miguel nodded slightly in acknowledgement but said nothing. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Julian pressed. Miguel sighed, looking out at the view rather than at Julian. "I told you, the conservatory in Caracas. But that doesn't explain." Julian gestured vaguely with his hands. "This situation. How does someone with your talent end up cleaning floors at a party?" A flash of something, pride perhaps or anger, crossed Miguel's face. "Not everyone gets to choose their path, Mr. Chen. Sometimes life chooses for you." Julian leaned against the stone railing, trying to understand. In his world, talent plus hard work always equaled success. It was a simple equation. "What happened?" Miguel was quiet for so long that Julian thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, his voice soft but clear. "I was 19 when I won a national competition in Venezuela. The prize was a scholarship to study in Moscow. My family was so proud." A small smile touched his lips at the memory. "My mother saved for months to buy me a proper suit for the trip." His smile faded. But that was 2014. The economy in Venezuela was collapsing. Political unrest everywhere. The week before I was supposed to leave, my father was killed during a protest. Julian felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "I'm sorry," he said, the words feeling woefully inadequate. Miguel continued as if he hadn't heard. "My mother got sick after that. My sister was only 12. I couldn't leave them. So I stayed, took whatever work I could find. Taught piano lessons when people could afford them, which wasn't often. And then you came to America," Julian guessed. Miguel nodded. 4 years ago. My sister had developed health problems too by then. They needed medicine we couldn't get in Venezuela." He shrugged. "So we left. My mother, my sister, and me. We had tourist visas at first, then applied for asylum. And now I clean offices during the day and work events like this at night. My sister is in college now, pre-med." There was unmistakable pride in his voice. "My mother lives with us. Her health is better, but she needs care." Julian tried to process this information. It was like looking through a window into a world he barely understood, despite all his wealth and education. "But your music, I still play," Miguel said. "There's a church near our apartment. They let me use their piano sometimes when no one is around. But that's—" Julian stopped himself from saying, "a waste." Instead, he asked, "Don't you miss performing?" Miguel looked at him directly for the first time. "Every day," he admitted. "But we all make choices, Mr. Chen. I chose my family." The simplicity of the statement hit Julian like a physical blow. In his own life, he had always chosen his ambitions first. Family, friends, relationships, all had taken a back seat to building his empire. And while he had gained incredible wealth and power, he had lost things too. Things he usually didn't allow himself to think about. "Call me Julian, please," he said. Miguel nodded but didn't say anything more. The 5 minutes he had promised were nearly up. "I want to help you," Julian blurted out before Miguel could leave. "Let me sponsor you. Get you proper opportunities to perform. With your talent, you could—" "No," Miguel cut him off firmly. "Thank you, but no." Julian stared at him, baffled. "But why not? This could change your life. You could make more in one concert than you make in a year of cleaning." It's not about money. Then what is it about? Miguel seemed to be weighing his words carefully. When I play now, I play for myself. For my soul. The moment I turn it into business, it becomes something else. Julian ran a hand through his hair in frustration. So you'd rather clean toilets than share your gift with the world? That makes no sense. As soon as the words left his mouth, Julian regretted them. Miguel's expression hardened. I think our 5 minutes are up, he said, turning to go back inside. Wait, Julian called after him. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. Miguel paused, his hand on the door handle. It's fine. You're not the first rich person to think my life choices don't make sense. Please, Julian said, the word still feeling strange on his tongue. Just hear me out. What if there was a way for you to play without compromising your principles? Without it being about money? Miguel turned back slightly, his interest cautiously piqued. I'm listening. Before Julian could continue, the terrace door opened. Vanessa stood there, her elegant figure silhouetted against the light from inside. There you are, she said to Julian. People are asking for you. The donors want to say goodbye. Julian felt torn. His responsibilities as a host pulled him in one direction, but his conversation with Miguel felt too important to cut short. I'll be right there, he told Vanessa. Then turning back to Miguel, we need to continue this discussion. Can we meet somewhere? Tomorrow, maybe? Miguel hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small slip of paper and a pencil. He quickly wrote something down and handed it to Julian. My number, he explained. But I work 2 jobs, so I don't have much free time. I'll make it work, Julian promised, carefully pocketing the paper. And Miguel, thank you for sharing your story with me. Miguel gave a small nod, then slipped past Vanessa and disappeared back into the house. Vanessa watched him go, then turned to Julian with a curious expression. What was that about? Julian stared at the door where Miguel had vanished. I'm not entirely sure yet, he admitted. Inside, the gala was winding down. Guests were collecting their coats and calling for their cars. Julian plastered on his host's smile and made the rounds, thanking everyone for coming, accepting compliments on the event's success. But his mind was elsewhere, still processing everything he had learned about Miguel. Later that night, after the last guest had left and the cleanup crew, including Miguel, had gone home, Julian sat alone in his study. The house felt emptier than usual, despite its massive size and luxurious furnishings. He pulled out the slip of paper with Miguel's phone number and stared at it. The handwriting was neat and precise, just like the man's piano playing. On impulse, Julian opened his laptop and typed Venezuela Economic Crisis 2014 into the search bar. What appeared on his screen shocked him. Images of empty grocery stores, protests in the streets, people standing in long lines for basic necessities. He read about hyperinflation, about how a country that had once been the wealthiest in South America had descended into chaos. He dug deeper, reading about the exodus of Venezuelans fleeing to neighboring countries, about the challenges asylum seekers faced in the United States. It was a side of recent history he had been only vaguely aware of. Too busy building his technology empire to pay much attention to international humanitarian crises. Julian rubbed his eyes, feeling a strange mix of emotions he couldn't quite name. Shame perhaps at his own ignorance, admiration for Miguel's resilience, and something else. A growing sense that his chance encounter with the janitor had happened for a reason. His phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. Great party. But what was with you and the piano guy? Never seen you so rattled. Julian stared at her message, unsure how to respond. How could he explain something he didn't fully understand himself? After a moment, he typed, His name is Miguel, and I think he just changed my life. He hit send, then leaned back in his chair, staring out at the night sky. For the first time in years, Julian Chen, billionaire tech mogul with the world at his feet, felt humbled. And strangely, instead of fighting the feeling, he welcomed it. The next morning, Julian woke earlier than usual. He had barely slept, his mind racing with thoughts of Miguel's music and his story. As he sipped his coffee on the balcony of his bedroom, watching the sunrise over the ocean, he made a decision. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. Thomas, it's me. I need a favor. Remember that community center downtown? The one your company was going to renovate for tax purposes. Is that still happening? Good. I want to add something to the plans. A music room. With a grand piano? Yes, I'm serious. No, I haven't lost my mind. At least I don't think so. I'll explain everything later. Just make it happen, okay? After hanging up, Julian scrolled to the message he had drafted to Miguel but hadn't sent yet. I have an idea. Not about money or fame. About music, community, and second chances. Can we meet? His finger hovered over the send button. This wasn't his usual territory. Julian Chen didn't do charity on a personal level. He wrote checks, sponsored events, put his name on buildings. He didn't get involved in the messy details of individual lives, but something about Miguel's playing. About the dignity with which he carried himself despite his circumstances, had touched something long dormant in Julian's heart. He pressed send. 3 days passed before Miguel responded to Julian's message. During that time, Julian found himself checking his phone more often than he cared to admit. When the reply finally came, it was brief. Sunday afternoon, 2 p.m., Parkview Community Center on 8th Street. Julian had to reschedule 2 meetings to make it work, something he normally never did. His assistant looked at him like he'd grown a second head when he told her to clear his Sunday afternoon for a meeting at a community center in one of the city's less affluent neighborhoods. Should I send a car for the person you're meeting? She asked, assuming whoever it was would be coming to Julian's office instead. No, I'm going there myself, Julian replied, enjoying her look of surprise. And keep this off my public calendar. That Sunday, Julian drove himself instead of using his usual car service. He dressed down in jeans and a simple button-up shirt, though his casual clothes probably cost more than what most people spent on their entire wardrobe. As he pulled his rarely used Tesla into the community center parking lot, he felt oddly nervous. This wasn't a business meeting or a date, the 2 types of encounters he was most comfortable navigating. This was something entirely new. The Parkview Community Center was a worn but well-maintained building with a small playground outside. Children's laughter filled the air as Julian approached the entrance. A hand-painted sign announced various community programs, ESL classes, senior bingo, after-school tutoring, food bank hours. Inside, he followed the sound of piano music down a hallway lined with children's artwork. The melody was simple but beautiful, a teaching piece, he guessed, not the complex classical works Miguel had played at the gala. Julian paused in the doorway of a small room. Miguel sat at an upright piano that had seen better days, playing slowly while a young girl of about 8 watched his hands intently. Next to her, an older woman, possibly her grandmother, smiled encouragingly. Now you try, Miguel said gently to the child. Remember, just like we practiced. The girl placed her small hands on the keys and began to play the same melody, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. When she made a mistake, Miguel waited patiently for her to find the right note. Beautiful, Lucia, he said when she finished. You've been practicing? The girl beamed with pride. Every day, Mr. Miguel. Abuela times me for 30 minutes. The grandmother nodded, saying something in Spanish that made Miguel smile. He responded in the same language, his voice warm and respectful. It was only after the lesson ended and the girl and her grandmother had left, waving goodbye, that Miguel noticed Julian standing in the doorway. You came, Miguel said, looking genuinely surprised. Julian stepped into the room. You invited me? Yes, but Miguel shrugged. People like you don't usually come to places like this. Instead of being offended, Julian looked around the modest room with its mismatched chairs and water-stained ceiling tiles. I can see why. You could use some better facilities. Miguel closed the piano lid carefully. We make do with what we have. The children don't care if the piano is old or the chairs don't match. They just want to learn. You teach them for free? Julian asked, noticing a small donation box on top of the piano. Some pay what they can, Miguel explained. Others can't afford anything. It doesn't matter to me. Music should be for everyone, not just those who can pay for lessons. Julian moved closer to the piano, running his fingers lightly over its scratched surface. How many students do you have? 12 right now. I can only teach on Sundays and some evenings. Between my 2 jobs, there isn't much time left. Julian tried to imagine what Miguel's life was like, working all day, cleaning offices, then evenings at catering events, then spending his one free day teaching children to play piano for little or no money. It was a level of dedication that made Julian's own hard work seem almost selfish in comparison. Why did you want to meet? Miguel asked, breaking into Julian's thoughts. Julian sat down on one of the chairs, gathering his thoughts. I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About playing for your soul, not for money or fame. Miguel nodded, waiting for him to continue. I want to understand it better, Julian admitted. Most of my life has been about achievement, success, recognition. The idea of having a gift like yours and keeping it private, it's foreign to me. A small smile touched Miguel's lips. And yet you want to understand. I do, Julian said, surprised by how much he meant it. Miguel considered him for a moment, then seemed to make a decision. I'm going to show you something. He picked up a worn backpack from the corner of the room. But not here. Follow me. Julian followed Miguel out of the community center and down several blocks to a small park. They sat on a bench under a large oak tree, somewhat removed from the families and dog walkers enjoying the sunny afternoon. From his backpack, Miguel pulled out a tablet in a protective case, not the latest model, but still a good one. My sister gave me this for my birthday last year, he explained. She saved for months. He tapped the screen a few times, then handed it to Julian. This is why I still play. Julian looked down at a video that was starting to play. It showed a small living room in what appeared to be a modest apartment. An elderly woman sat in an armchair, her face lined with age but her eyes bright and alert. A younger woman in her early 20s sat on the floor beside her, both watching someone off camera. Then the music began. Debussy's Clair de Lune played with exquisite sensitivity. The camera shifted slightly and Julian could see Miguel at a small electronic keyboard. His eyes closed as he played. What caught Julian's attention, though, was not the playing itself, but the expressions on the faces of the two women. The older woman, Miguel's mother, Julian guessed, had tears streaming down her cheeks, but she was smiling. The younger woman, his sister, watched with such love and pride that it was almost painful to witness. When the piece ended, the video continued for a few more seconds. The sister said something in Spanish and the mother nodded, reaching out to touch Miguel's hand as he finished playing. The love between the three of them was palpable, even through the small screen. The video ended and Julian handed the tablet back, feeling like he had been given a glimpse of something deeply private. That's my family, Miguel confirmed. My mother and my sister, Ana. They love your playing, Julian said, stating the obvious because he wasn't sure what else to say. Miguel nodded. My mother used to be a piano teacher before her health declined. She was my first teacher. When I play for her now, it brings back happy memories from before. He trailed off, then continued. And Ana, she works so hard at her studies. When I play, she can relax for a while. Julian thought about his own family. His parents lived in a luxury retirement community in Florida, enjoying the fruits of their son's success. They spoke on holidays and birthdays. They were proud of him, certainly, but there was a distance between them that had nothing to do with geography. I think I'm beginning to understand, Julian said slowly. For you, music isn't about performance or achievement. It's about connection. Yes, Miguel said simply. Connection to my family, to my students, to myself, to something larger than all of us. They sat in silence for a while, watching children play on the swings nearby. I still want to help you, Julian finally said, not to make you famous or to profit from your talent, but to give you more opportunities to create those connections. Miguel looked skeptical. How? Julian leaned forward, suddenly energized. The community center. What if it had a real music program? Better instruments, more space, resources for more students? You could teach more, maybe cut back on your other jobs. That sounds nice, but I'm serious, Julian interrupted. I could fund it anonymously. No strings attached, no publicity, no expectations. Just giving you the tools to do more of what you're already doing. Miguel studied Julian's face, looking for the catch. Why would you do that? It was a fair question, and Julian took his time answering. Partly because your talent deserves better than a beat-up old piano in a room with leaky ceilings. But mostly because I think I need to learn what you already know, about what really matters. The honesty of the statement surprised both of them. Julian hadn't planned to say that, hadn't even fully realized it until the words were out of his mouth. Miguel didn't respond right away. He gazed across the park, his expression thoughtful. I need to think about it, he finally said. This isn't just about me. It would affect my students, their families, the whole community. Of course, Julian agreed, impressed by Miguel's careful consideration. In his world, people jumped at money first and asked questions later. Take all the time you need. As they walked back toward the community center, Julian felt his phone vibrating in his pocket. He pulled it out to see Vanessa's name on the screen. With a small pang of guilt, he realized he had completely forgotten their dinner plans for that evening. "I need to take this," he told Miguel, stepping aside to answer the call. "Julian, where are you?" Vanessa asked without preamble. "We were supposed to meet the Wilsons for dinner 20 minutes ago." "I'm sorry," Julian said, genuinely meaning it. "Something came up. Can you make my excuses? I'll explain everything later." There was a pause on the other end. "This is about that piano player, isn't it? The janitor from the gala." "His name is Miguel," Julian said, a slight edge to his voice. Another pause. "You're different since you met him," Vanessa said, her tone softer now. "I'm not sure if that's good or bad yet." "Neither am I," Julian admitted. "But I need to see this through." After ending the call, he turned back to Miguel, who was waiting patiently a few steps away. "Sorry about that." Miguel nodded in understanding. "Your girlfriend?" "Yes, I was supposed to be at a dinner with her and some business associates." "You should go," Miguel said. "We can talk another time." Julian shook his head. "They'll survive without me for one night. This is more important." As soon as the words left his mouth, Julian realized how much he had changed in just a few days. A week ago, nothing would have been more important than a dinner with potential investors. Now here he was, standing in a public park with a janitor, feeling like he was exactly where he needed to be. "I'd like to hear you play again," Julian said impulsively. "Not like at the gala. Like in that video. Playing from your heart for people you care about." Miguel considered the request, then nodded slowly. "Come back to the center next Sunday. My students are giving a small recital for their families. It's nothing fancy, but I'll be there," Julian promised. As they parted ways, Julian felt lighter somehow, as if a weight he hadn't known he was carrying had been lifted. He didn't understand exactly what was happening to him, but for the first time in years he was following his instincts rather than his ambitions, and it felt right. The week passed in a blur for Julian. During the day, he ran his company with the same sharp focus he was known for. But his evenings were spent differently. Instead of networking dinners or late nights at the office, he found himself researching community music programs and reading about the healing power of music education. Vanessa noticed the change. "You've been distracted," she said over coffee at his place on Saturday morning. "Is everything okay?" Julian considered how to answer. "I'm fine. Just thinking about some new projects." "Business projects?" she asked, her perfectly shaped eyebrow raised in doubt. "Not exactly." Julian hesitated, then decided to be honest. "I'm going to a piano recital tomorrow. At that community center." Vanessa set down her cup. "The janitor again?" "Miguel," Julian corrected her automatically. "He teaches kids there on weekends. They're having a small performance for their families." "And you're going?" Vanessa sounded genuinely confused. "Why, it was a fair question." A month ago, Julian would have found the idea laughable himself. "Because he invited me, and because I think I might learn something." Vanessa studied him for a long moment. "You really are serious about this?" "I am." "Then I'm coming with you," she said, surprising him. Julian blinked. "You want to come to a children's piano recital in a rundown community center?" "No," she admitted with a small smile. "But I want to understand what's got you so captivated. And I'm curious about this Miguel person who's managed to crack the famous Julian Chen shell." Julian felt a surge of gratitude. Vanessa could have been jealous or dismissive, but instead she was making an effort to understand. Maybe he had underestimated her too. Sunday afternoon arrived and Julian found himself oddly nervous as he and Vanessa pulled into the community center parking lot. This time he had let his driver bring them, aware that his Tesla might attract unwanted attention in the neighborhood. "This is it?" Vanessa asked, looking at the modest building with its faded paint and small playground. "This is it," Julian confirmed. "Not quite the concert hall you're used to." She adjusted her designer sunglasses. "It has character." Inside, the main room of the center had been transformed. Rows of mismatched chairs faced the old upright piano. Handmade decorations hung from the ceiling, colorful paper stars and musical notes cut from construction paper. A hand-painted banner proclaimed Spring Music Recital in bright letters. The room was already half full with families, parents, grandparents, siblings, all dressed in their Sunday best. Children in pressed shirts and neat dresses sat nervously at the front, some practicing finger movements on their laps. Julian and Vanessa stood out in the crowd, but no one made them feel unwelcome. An elderly lady offered them a program, a single sheet of paper with the students' names and their pieces listed in careful handwriting. They found seats toward the back as more families filed in. The room grew warm with bodies and anticipation. Some of the adults looked tired, as if they had come straight from work, but their faces glowed with pride as they pointed out their children to neighbors and friends. Miguel entered from a side door, dressed simply but neatly in dark pants and a white shirt. He seemed surprised to see Julian and Vanessa, but acknowledged them with a small nod before turning his attention to his students. The recital began with the youngest children playing simple pieces. Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and Mary Had a Little Lamb, performed with intense concentration and occasional missed notes. The audience applauded enthusiastically after each performance, no matter how many mistakes were made. Julian found himself genuinely enjoying the show. There was something refreshing about the unpolished honesty of it all. Children trying their best, parents bursting with pride, a community coming together to celebrate small achievements. He glanced at Vanessa and was surprised to see her watching the performances with genuine interest. Her usual cool demeanor softened. As the recital progressed, the pieces became more complex. A boy of about 12 played a simplified version of Beethoven's Für Elise with remarkable sensitivity. Two sisters performed a duet, giggling when they made mistakes but continuing bravely. Then came the final student, Lucia, the young girl Julian had seen during his first visit. She approached the piano with solemn determination, adjusted the bench carefully, and began to play Schumann's The Happy Farmer. Her small fingers moved with surprising precision, and though the tempo was slower than traditional, every note was clear and purposeful. When she finished, the audience erupted in applause. Lucia's grandmother wiped tears from her eyes as the child took a formal bow, beaming with pride. Miguel stepped forward then. "Thank you all for coming today. I'm so proud of every one of my students. They practice hard, often on keyboards that don't have all their keys working or on paper keyboards they've drawn themselves, but they never give up." He paused, looking around the room. "Music has the power to transform lives. It has transformed mine, and with your support, these children will carry music in their hearts forever, no matter where life takes them." The audience applauded again. Then, to Julian's surprise, Lucia stood up and approached the microphone. "We have a special surprise," she announced with the confidence only an 8-year-old could muster. "Mr. Miguel is going to play for us, too." Miguel looked genuinely startled, but the children and parents began to chant his name, and he gave in with a good-natured laugh. All right, he said, sitting down at the piano. "Just one piece." The room fell silent as Miguel closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and began to play. It was Debussy's Reverie, a piece that flowed like water, gentle yet profound. Even on the old upright piano with its slightly out-of-tune keys, the music transformed the humble room into something magical. Julian watched the faces around him, children listening with wide-eyed wonder, parents momentarily forgetting their daily struggles, elderly people closing their eyes and swaying slightly to the melody. For those few minutes, everyone in the room was connected by something beyond words. When Miguel finished, there was a moment of complete silence before the applause began. It wasn't the polished applause of concert halls, but something more genuine, people clapping, cheering, some even stamping their feet. After the recital, families gathered around a table with homemade refreshments. Children ran about, the pressure of performance released. Julian and Vanessa stood somewhat awkwardly until Miguel approached them. "You came," he said to Julian, then nodded respectfully to Vanessa. "Both of you." "It was beautiful," Vanessa said sincerely. "The children were wonderful." "They were," Miguel agreed with obvious pride. "They work so hard." Julian looked around the room, at the families celebrating together, at the children proudly showing off their certificates. "I've been to concerts all over the world," he said quietly, "but I've never seen anything quite like this." Miguel smiled. "Because this isn't about performance. It's about joy." "I see that now," Julian said. He took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about your community center project. If you're still interested." "I am," Miguel said. "But I have conditions," Julian raised his eyebrows. "Conditions?" "The program stays free for families who can't afford lessons. I keep artistic control, and no naming rights, no Julian Chen Music Center signs." Julian laughed. Agreed on all counts. He hesitated, then added, "But there's something else I want to discuss with you." Miguel looked curious. "What's that?" "I want to take piano lessons," Julian said, the word surprising even himself. "From you?" Miguel stared at him in disbelief. "You want me to teach you piano?" "Yes," Julian said firmly. "You told me music is about connection. I want to understand that for myself." A slow smile spread across Miguel's face. "You'll be a terrible student, you know." "Rich people usually are. No patience." "Probably," Julian agreed with a laugh. "But I'll try." Vanessa watched this exchange with fascination. When Miguel was called away by one of his students, she turned to Julian. "You're serious about learning piano? You, Julian Chen, who can't sit still for 5 minutes?" "I am," Julian said, surprising himself with how certain he felt. "You know," Vanessa said thoughtfully, "when you said that ridiculous thing at the gala, 'Play this and I'll marry you,' I was embarrassed for you." Julian winced at the memory. "Not my finest moment. But now I'm wondering if you weren't accidentally onto something," she continued. "Not the marriage part, obviously, but the idea that music could change your life." She looked at him with new eyes. "It already is changing you." Julian considered her words. In just 2 weeks, his perspective had shifted dramatically. The drive for more money, more success, more recognition, had dominated his life for so long that he'd forgotten to ask why he wanted those things in the first place. 6 months later, the Parkview Community Center unveiled its new music wing. The space featured soundproofed practice rooms, new instruments, and a small performance hall with excellent acoustics. The old upright piano remained in place of honor, though now it had been properly restored. There was no ribbon-cutting ceremony, no press release, no plaque announcing the donor's name. Just a simple sign: music for everyone. On opening day, the hall was filled with families from the neighborhood. Miguel's students, now numbering over 30, performed a varied program that showcased their progress. Among them, somewhat nervously, was Julian Chen, playing a simple but clean rendition of Bach's Minuet in G afterward, as people mingled and explored the new facilities. Thomas approached Julian. "I still can't believe you're taking piano lessons," he said, shaking his head in amusement. "What happened to time is money?" Julian smiled. "I found something more valuable than money. And that ridiculous marriage proposal?" Thomas teased. "Any plans to follow through on that?" Julian laughed. "No, but I did learn something important." He looked across the room where Miguel was showing a group of children how to care for the new instruments, his face animated with passion. "What's that?" Thomas asked. "That true wealth isn't about what you own or achieve," Julian said. "It's about what you give, what you learn, and who you become in the process." Later that evening, as the crowd thinned, Julian found himself alone with Miguel at the old upright piano. "Your Bach wasn't terrible," Miguel said with a teasing smile, "for a beginner." "High praise indeed," Julian laughed. "Maybe in 10 years I'll be as good as your 8-year-olds. Miguel's expression turned serious. "Thank you for all this," he said, gesturing around at the new facilities. "It will change so many lives, including mine," Julian said quietly. "When I made that stupid joke at the gala, I never imagined that a janitor would change your perspective." Miguel finished for him. "That music would show me what I was missing," Julian corrected him. "And for that, I'll always be grateful." As they sat side by side on the piano bench, Julian realized that his journey had just begun. He had spent his life climbing to the top of his self-made mountain, only to discover that the view wasn't what he expected. Now, with each piano lesson, each community concert, each moment spent in service rather than acquisition, he was learning to see the world and himself in a whole new light. And that, he realized, was worth more than all the billions in his bank account.